Hi friends, welcome back to the channel. With this lecture, we are starting a new series on the channel related to diabetes mellitus, in which we'll try to cover all important guidelines, OPD essential approaches and some interesting cases related to diabetes. So let's start the series with first lecture on diagnosis and classification of diabetes based on ADA 2026, that is the latest guidelines. So as we all know, diabetes is a group of metabolic disorders of carbohydrate metabolism characterized by both glucose underutilization as an energy source as well as overproduction due to inappropriate gluconeogenesis and glycogenolysis, ultimately leading to hyperglycemia. When we talk of recommended diagnostic tests for diabetes, it can be diagnosed based on either HbA1c or plasma glucose test. Now HbA1c, that is glycated hemoglobin, as we all know, reflects the average blood glucose levels over the past 2 to 3 months. It does not require fasting and therefore provides a stable long-term measure of glycemic control. So the advantage is that it is highly convenient as it can be performed at any time of the day without any dietary restriction. Coming on to plasma glucose test, these three type of tests can be used for diagnosis of diabetes. So it basically evaluates the current circulating glucose levels using various protocols. So we can either use fasting plasma glucose after fasting of at least 8 hours, then 2-hour oral glucose tolerance test, which can be done 2-hour post glucose load using 75 gram of anhydrous glucose. 75 gram of anhydrous glucose. Thirdly, random plasma glucose can also be used for diagnosis for individuals who are having classic symptoms of hyperglycemia like polyuria, polydipsia and unexplained weight loss, or a patient who has presented with hyperglycemic crisis like DKA or HHS. Now some important points which should be kept in mind while screening and diagnosis of diabetes. As compared to fasting plasma glucose and HbA1c, 2-hour prandial glucose is more sensitive and therefore yields a higher diagnostic rate for both pre-diabetes and diabetes diagnosis. Secondly, same tests are used both for screening as well as confirmation and for distinguishing pre-diabetes from diabetes. As we all know, 2-hour prandial glucose is more sensitive and it is particularly preferred in cases of cystic fibrosis related diabetes and post transplantation related diabetes, as these conditions have deranged postprandial plasma glucose in the initial phases. Now for routine screening, we usually prefer fasting plasma glucose and HbA1c for non-pregnant individuals because of ease of administration. Now can we use CGM for diagnosis of diabetes? So currently there is insufficient evidence to support the use of CGM for routine diagnosis or screening. Now diagnostic standards are optimized specifically to isolate typical glycemic behaviors. Now what about asymptomatic cases? If classic hyperglycemic symptoms are absent, we need to confirm the test by repeating it. Now while testing, it should be kept in mind that external variables are very important which can affect the glucose results. These include recent physical activity, acute illness or stress. Now for plasma glucose, whenever we are checking plasma glucose, we need to understand that sample processing has to be done immediately. Otherwise, it can lead to falsely low concentration if these are not processed and analyzed promptly. So around 5 to 7% fall of plasma glucose occurs with each 1 hour delay of sample processing with fluoride vials. Now let's discuss the criteria for diagnosis of diabetes in non-pregnant individuals, which most of us already know. So it can be diagnosed using HbA1c of more than equal to 6.5%. The test should be performed in a lab using a method that is NGSP certified. NGSP is National Glycohemoglobin Standardized Program. and this test should be standardized to DCCT assay, that is Diabetes Control and Complication Trial, the test which was used in DCCT trial, or based on fasting plasma glucose. If it is more than equal to 126 milligram per deciliter, we can define diabetes, and fasting is defined as no caloric intake for at least 8 hours. Or we can diagnose diabetes with a 2-hour postprandial glucose of more than equal to 200 after a 75 gram anhydrous glucose challenge test. The test should be performed as described by the WHO using a glucose load containing 25 gram anhydrous glucose dissolved in water. Finally, diabetes can also be diagnosed in individuals with classic symptoms of hyperglycemia like polyuria, polydipsia, unexplained weight loss, or who presented with hyperglycemic crisis like DK, HHS. Only random blood glucose of more than equal to 200 can be used for diagnosis. So random is any time of day without regard to time since previous meal. Now for diagnosis, we require at least 2 abnormal results from different tests which may be obtained at the same time. For example, we can use HbA1c and fasting plasma glucose. If both of these are deranged at the same time, we can there only diagnose diabetes mellitus, or we can use a single test which can be repeated at a different time. For example, if HbA1c is more than equal to 6.5 at one particular time, and after repeating it, it is again more than equal to 6.5, then also we can diagnose diabetes. Now let's see what is the criteria for defining pre-diabetes. So firstly, we need to understand that if we are performing OGTT in some patient, we need to ask the patient to take at least 150 gram of carbohydrates on 3 days prior to OGTT. He or she has not to restrict the carbohydrate in the diet, because antecedent carb restriction can falsely elevate post-challenge plasma glucose, which leads to false positive OGTT. This occurs because carbohydrate restriction can temporarily reduce the body's ability to handle a glucose load. So pre-diabetes is defined as either a HbA1c of 5.7 to 6.4, or fasting plasma glucose of 100 to 125 milligram per deciliter, or 2-hour oral glucose of 140 to 199 after a 75 gram OGTT. Now it should be noted that for all these 3 tests, risk is continuous. That is, the risk becomes disproportionately greater at higher end of the range. Now let's see what are the key differences while using glucose versus HbA1c as diagnostic test. So as we all know, glucose is inexpensive test and it is available in most of the laboratories, while HbA1c is slightly more expensive. Glucose is an acute measure, while HbA1c is a chronic measure for last 2 to 3 months. Pre-analytic stability of HbA1c is better. Now for sampling, usually glucose is taken in fluoride vials, while HbA1c requires sample in EDTA vial. HbA1c assay is well and standardized using a DCCT protocol. Fasting is not required for HbA1c. Within person variability is low for HbA1c, but there can be some factors which can affect both glucose as well as HbA1c. So plasma glucose levels can be affected by food intake, stress, recent illness or activity, while it is not affected by these factors if we talk about HbA1c. But there are many factors which can also alter HbA1c. So if a patient is having iron deficiency anemia or B12 deficiency anemia or history of splenectomy, these conditions usually prolong the RBC lifespan. Therefore, these can falsely elevate HbA1c. While in the patients who are having acute blood loss, hemolysis, these conditions will decrease the RBC lifespan and can falsely show lower values of A1c. So these are the various differences between plasma glucose and A1c. Now several key characteristics of A1c include various advantages because it is having greater pre-analytic stability, fewer day-to-day variations due to stress, nutrition, illness, but at the same time HbA1c is having lower sensitivity as compared to 2-hour plasma glucose. It is a weighted average of glucose measured over past 2 to 3 months, with highest weightage being given by the last month glucose values. Therefore, recent blood glucose exposure can heavily influence the overall A1C values. There are certain genetic variations which can alter the hemoglobin bindings. For example, an X-linked G6PD variant, which is seen in around 11% black population in US, will falsely lower their HbA1c by 0.8%. Also, there are some racial factors. So, blacks are usually having higher HbA1c by around 0.3 percentage. Now, let's see the confirmation of diagnosis. So, in the absence of clear clinical features like osmotic symptoms or hyperglycemic crisis, confirmatory tests are necessary to establish the diagnosis. If there is osmotic symptoms or hyperglycemic crisis, only single test can make the diagnosis and no confirmation is required. So, how to confirm the diagnosis? Either we can confirm at the same time during the first visit only. So, we need at least 2 abnormal screening test results obtained at the same time for the diagnosis, or we can use sequential testing. So, if one test is abnormal, we can repeat the same test after some time. If that is also abnormal, then we can diagnose diabetes. So, let's discuss this with the help of some examples. So, first example is patient is having HbA1c 7% and we have repeated the HbA1c, it has come out to be 6.7%. Both are above the cutoff, so this will be diagnosed as diabetes. Second example, on the first visit itself, the patient's fasting plasma glucose is 141, which is well above the cutoff, and HbA1c is 6.9, which is again above the cutoff. This patient will also be labeled as diabetes. Third example, fasting plasma glucose is 145, but HbA1c is in the pre-diabetes range, that is 5.9. So, preferably the test which has deranged value, which is fasting plasma glucose in this case, should be repeated after some time. So, we have to also consider all the important factors which can falsely load the HbA1c in this case, like the presence of hemolytic anemia or blood transfusion, etc. If these factors are present, we can alternatively use fructosamine or glycated albumin for identifying the long-term glucose control. So, how to manage discordant results? When two different tests are discordant, we have to repeat the test that is above the diagnostic threshold. So, in this case, example 3, it will be fasting plasma glucose, and we have to carefully consider the patient's specific physiological factors that may affect the individual test results. Now, after we have discussed how to diagnose diabetes, let's discuss the basic classification of diabetes as per ADA 2026 guidelines. So, it can be basically divided into type 1 diabetes, which occurs due to autoimmune destruction of beta cells, usually leading to absolute insulin deficiency. This also includes latent autoimmune diabetes of adults, which is initially responsive to oral hypoglycemic agents but later requires insulin therapy. Secondly, type 2 diabetes, this occurs due to non-autoimmune progressive loss of beta cell reserve, frequently on the background of insulin resistance. Then some specific types like monogenic diabetes syndromes, diseases of exocrine pancreas like due to cystic fibrosis, chronic pancreatitis, and drug or chemical induced diabetes. Then GDM is diabetes which is diagnosed in second or third trimester of pregnancy that was not clearly overt prior to the gestation. Now, there are some diagnostic challenges between type 1 and type 2, and both diseases can occur in all age group. First of all, it was a myth that type 1 is usually seen in children and type 2 is commonly seen in adults. Now we are seeing both the diseases can occur in all age group, and initial misdiagnosis is common, which can occur in up to 40% cases of type 1 diabetes. Now, a simple diagnostic approach, although it is not prospectively validated, can be useful to distinguish type 1 versus type 2. This is known as AABBCC diagnostic approach. So age less than 35 years, presence of autoimmunity signs and antibody testing like personal or family history of autoimmune diseases or polyglandular autoimmune syndrome, then body habitus, that is BMI less than 25, background family history of diabetes, that is type 1 diabetes, control and rapid progression to insulin requirement, patient who is not responsive to OHA and is rapidly progressing to insulin requirement, and comorbidities like autoimmune thyroid disease, celiac disease, and use of immune checkpoint inhibitors. So all these factors, these are typically associated with type, and this can be used to distinguish type 1 from type 2. Now let's discuss a very interesting approach which is available in ADA 2026. So if any adult with suspected type 1 diabetes comes to you, you have to first order islet cell autoantibodies. So we usually order GAD65 antibody, which is the primary antibody. If it comes out to be negative, then we can order IA2 or ZN-T8 antibody. If the patient is not on insulin treatment, then we can also order anti-insulin antibody. If antibody is positive, we can directly label it as type 1 diabetes. If it is negative, then we have to consider the age of the patient. So 5 to 10% of type 1 diabetes adults can have antibody negative. So if the age is less than 35, we see whether there are any features of monogenic diabetes. What are these features? So these patients usually have HbA1c of less than 7.5 at the time of diagnosis, at least one parent with diabetes mellitus. Some specific monogenic causes can be identified if there are renal cyst, partial lipodystrophy, maternal inherited deafness, and severe insulin resistance in absence of obesity. These will also favor monogenic diabetes. So if any of these features are present, then we can test for C-peptide. So if C-peptide is coming out to be more than 200 picomole per liter, which is more than 0.6 nanogram per ml, we proceed with genetic testing for monogenic diabetes. If C-peptide is less than 0.6, then we can label it as type 1 diabetes, since these patients are having absolute insulin deficiency. If there are no features of monogenic diabetes, then we see whether there are any features of type 2 diabetes. So what are the features of type 2 diabetes? BMI more than equal to 25, absence of weight loss in the presence of uncontrolled hyperglycemia, absence of ketoacidosis, and less marked hyperglycemia as compared to type 1. So we can consider these as features of type 2. If there are no features of type 2, then also we can label it as type 1. If there are features of type 2 and the patient is more than 35 years of age, we label it as unclear classification. So, especially in older individuals, type 2 diabetes mellitus should strongly be considered, as type 2 patients who have long duration of diabetes, these can also be insulopenic. So, for these patients, trial of non-insulin therapy can be given with careful monitoring and education of the patient, so that insulin can be started if blood glucose is uncontrolled. We can consider C-peptide testing after more than 3 years of duration in these patients. If C-peptide is less than 200, then type 1, 200 to 600, then indeterminate, and more than 600, that is more than 1.8 nanogram per ml, then it is considered as type 2 diabetes. For indeterminate cases, we usually repeat C-peptide after some interval. So this was all about this lecture, guys. I hope you will like this series. Thank you so much.